Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Had Ultra Ego Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Ochako Uraraka knew that the path to being a hero would be tough. She knew that there would be dangerous moments that would put her life on the line. Even if she went into the rescue and recovery section of the harrowing job, she was bound to face danger. And she knew that the UA entrance exam was meant to be the most difficult and most dangerous exam to ever be issued by any hero course in history. However, she was determined to become a hero so that she could properly provide for her family so that they could live a life of luxury and comfort, where money was no longer an issue for them, and they could enjoy life to the fullest. But the moment the giant machine came barreling towards her, while her foot was pinned under the rubble, leaving her helpless as the zero-pointer was almost on top of her. She truly believed that she was going to die. And then, he appeared. The same nervous boy she met this morning. He had looked so afraid and so nervous of everything around him when she first saw him. She couldn't help but stop him from falling on his face when he tripped on his own 2 feet. She didn't know if she would ever meet him again at the time, but she didn't really think about it that much as she was more focused on passing this exam and getting into UA. Then the zero-pointer appeared, and for whatever reason, one that she could barely understand, he came back and saved her when so many others just ran. He distracted the machine, pried her loose from the rubble and carried her to safety, only to then sacrifice himself to save her again, as the machine's fist had slammed into him. And just when she thought he was gone, he come back glowing like shining star and punched the zero-pointer so hard, it went flying all the way to the wall at the other side of the battle center. After all that, she couldn't help but gaze in awe as the boy remained lingering in the air as his fist was still stretched out from the punch as he stared at the destruction he had unleashed. It was honestly just amazing. For a whole moment, no one said a thing. No one could say a thing as they just stared at the boy that lingered in the air, and the massive obstacle that he just sent flying with one punch. Eyes were wide and mouths were hanging in shock as everyone stared between the smoking remains of the massive zero-pointer and the glowing red boy that was still lingering in the air. No one could say anything to summarize what they just witnessed. No one could find the words to express the great shock that was still lingering in their systems, other than a simple and collective "Holy shit." It was also at that moment that the red glow faded off Izuku's body as his eyes rolled into the back of his head and he passed out, his body going limp as he began to fall to the ground. At first, they thought he was going to be okay until they noticed that his arms were bleeding, his legs were waving unnaturally and his eyes were fully closed. They instantly realized that he had passed out from the pain. Ochako instantly noticed this as she quickly hobbled over to one of the pieces of the robot, touching it with all 5 fingers, as she managed to get it to float and moved it into the path of the falling boy. Almost, she said to herself as she watched the unconscious boy fall closer and closer to the ground, the limit of her own quirk already beginning to affect her as she felt her stomach churn. But she didn't care about that as all she could focus on was the boy who saved her life, who would die at any moment unless she acted. Then, just as he was close to the ground, she reared back her hand and slapped him right across the face. Had he been awake, Izuku would have been really confused and stunned at what just happened. But seeing as he was unconscious, his body merely stopped an inch or 2 off the ground as Ochako struggled to bring her hands together and said, "Our release." As her fingertips touched and the boy gently landed on the ground, while she and the part also landed on the ground. She took a moment to breathe when her stomach began to churn and she could no longer hold back her side effects. And vomited all over the machine. She really hated the side effect of her quirk. The first thing Izuku noticed when he woke up was the midday sun directly over him as he found himself lying on the ground, staring up at the sky. I'm alive. How? Wasn't I getting crushed by the zero-pointer? What happened? Did someone save me? He thought to himself as he tried to stand up, but clenched his teeth in pain and fell back down. Gah! What the hell? Why can't I move my... He stopped as he managed to lift his head up and looked at what he could scarcely call his arms. They were dark red, bleeding and broken in multiple places as he could feel the same thing with his legs as they were now bent at unnatural angles. What the hell happened to my body? He said as he looked at the broken remains of his body, his mind trying to figure out what had happened as the last thing he remembered was the zero-pointer's attack bearing down on him right after he. The zero-pointer. What happened to the zero-pointer? He asked as he quickly searched for the machine. He then noticed that everyone was staring at him, or rather what was behind him, as he turned his head and gasped in shock. The massive machine that had sent terror down his spine and had nearly crushed the nice girl was now laying against the furthest wall of the battle center, as its entire being was crushed, broken and destroyed. Its entire face was caved in. Its right arm was completely destroyed as its entire body was slowly consumed in flames. His mind was instantly abuzz with questions as he tried to figure out what the hell had happened after he had passed out. It was hard for him to believe that anyone here could have the power to destroy the machine so brutally, that the only time he had ever seen such destruction of that magnitude was when All Might fought the rampaging robot of Dr. Jekyll. But All Might wasn't here, so how could it have? He then looked back at his arms and legs as he recognized the familiar pattern of broken bones and damaged skin, as he had seen it every time he overused One for All in his training. Did I do that? But how? He asked himself before he heard a barfing sound, and he turned his head to see the girl from before, lying on top of a broken remain of a robot as she seemed to be upheaving her stomach. Hey, are you alright? She asked, even as she held a hand over her mouth. Why yeah? Are you alright? He asked back as he noticed she was not looking so good. She weakly nodded as he sighed in relief. Thank God, he said as he was just glad he managed to save her. His questions forgotten as he was just glad she was alright. Meanwhile, Present Mike stood on top of the tower with a shocked look on his face as he stared at the remains of the zero-pointer. Both a little afraid and a little impressed as he looked at the smoking remains. Suddenly a small beeping noise went off in his hands as he looked down and pulled out a device from his pocket. He instantly remembered what he was meant to be doing as he pulled out a remote and hit the button. Everywhere in the battle centers a loud siren blared out as everyone looked around confused. Time's up. His voice then called out over the battle centers as everyone on the B sector snapped their attention to the voice. Izuku said as he looked up to the voice. Time's up, ladies and gentlemen. Good luck with your results. Present Mike said over the entire areas as Izuku could only stare then widen his eyes in shock. What? It's over. But he said as he felt his entire body go numb, partially due to the fact his limbs were broken, as he realized he only got 15 points. Not enough to guarantee him into UA and defiantly not enough to place him anywhere in the top 3. He failed to get any more points after the zero-pointer showed up. He failed to fulfill the promise he made to himself that he would excel at this exam. He failed to live up to the expectation that was now placed on his shoulders. And worst of all, he failed. All Might he let his head fall back to the ground as he just stared up at the sky. The pain in his arms and legs felt like nothing to him, as all he could feel was his hope and dreams being ripped out of his chest and then crushed once again beneath the harsh boot of life. It was like all he had done these last 10 months meant nothing as he still ended up failing in the end. It was as if the universe didn't want him to be a hero, no matter how hard he tried. 15 points. I only got 15 points, damn it. He whispered to himself as Ochako could only look sadly at the defeated look on his face. Meanwhile, everyone else was just looking in shock at the boy as he lay on the ground with his arms broken and his legs bent at unnatural angles. It was almost like he was a puppet whose strings had just been cut, laying there on the ground. The same boy that managed to take down the zero-pointer, a machine so massive that there could have been no way any of them could have taken it out. Yet somehow, he managed it and beat it with one punch to the face. It was honestly amazing. Whoa, what was that guy? He just took down that thing with one punch. He seemed to have a reinforcement type quirk, but that was weird. And what the heck was up with that glow? Did it increase his strength or something? Yeah, but if he had such an amazing quirk, why was he so jumpy all the time? What kind of life did he live to make him react like that? Maybe it was an act, to trick us and make us think he wasn't a threat? Yeah, but I think he just said he only got 15 points? I don't think that's enough to pass. And look at his limbs, they're all broken up. What kind of quirk does that to their own body? Either way, that guy was pretty amazing. The examinees said around him as Izuku had tuned them all out. But while they chatted and discussed what his quirk was, one of them was just staring at him and the damage he had done to the robot. No, that's not it. They're missing the point. Haven't they figured it out yet? Didn't they see him rush out to save that girl? He went over there to save her, despite knowing how little time was left or how little points he managed to get. And even then, he sacrificed himself to save her again, and only managed to survive because of his quirk, he thought as he looked over to the boy. The boy's name was Tenya Iida, another examinee hopeful who wanted to come to UA and become a professional hero like the rest of his family. The Iida family had been a family of heroes for generations, from his father and his mother to all the way back to his grandmother and grandfather. It had since then become a tradition that members of his family to become great heroes. Knowing this, he spent all his time dedicating himself to becoming a professional hero like his father and his brother. He applied for UA High because it was the best hero academy in the world, and the only place he could become fully recognized as a professional hero. He knew that he would pass the written exam and had no doubts that he would pass the physical exam thanks to his training and quirk. But when the 0-pointer had emerged, he like the rest ran from the machine as all he cared about was making it through the test and enter UA High. He saw the girl earlier and he saw the boy from before on his ass as he wanted to help them, but chose not to if he wanted to pass this exam. Yet despite all of that, his mind flashed back to the moment he ran past him and rushed in to save her. He jumped in to save her, sacrificing himself to save her, and he didn't even hesitate, he thought as he gripped his fist and bit his lip. If we hadn't been in an exam, of course, I would have done the same, he proclaimed in his head when something in his brain clicked. Wait, exam, would that be part of the test? Okay, everyone please step back, and an elderly voice said as everyone turned to see a small old lady walking towards her. Izuku instantly recognized her as Recovery Girl as she was handing out small treats to the examinees who had managed to make it through unscathed. Here you go dearie, have some gummy bears, she said as she handed some treats to Tenya. Huh, thank you, he said with confusion as she then stepped by him and looked down at the Izuku. Oh dear, you got hurt this badly from your own quirk? She asked as Izuku could instantly tell she was not using his name on purpose because she needed to be impartial and not let others know about their connection lest they claim something. But somehow, he could tell she was angry with him as there was a subtle glare in her eyes. Yeah, I guess I'm not used to my quirk just yet, he said as the woman only sighed and used her quirk to heal him, Izuku already used to her healing abilities. But to everyone else, it was a shock to see her suddenly stretch her lips and place them on the boy's head. But then their shocks turned to awe as a green aura surrounded the boy's body as it began to heal rapidly. And in no time at all, he was completely fixed. Whoa, who is she and what the heck was that? One of the examinees asked as the blonde boy from earlier explained. That mademoiselle is the backbone of UA. She is the school's licensed nurse, the youthful heroine. Recovery Girl. Her quirk is the super activation of healing abilities in the human body. It is because of her that UA can hold such reckless exams, he explained as Izuku started to get up, but wobbled slightly as he was forced to remain seated. Young man, meet me in my office when you can walk. I may have healed you with my quirk, but I still need to treat your injuries, she said as Izuku instantly knew the real reason. She was going to scold him again, and no doubt it was going to be very loud. Why yes ma'am, he said as she then went about healing the others. He sighed as he sat on the ground and looked up to the clouds, their white and weightless forms drifting by as he thought about how upset All Might would be when he found out he didn't pass. He was going to be disappointed in him. And that was something he never wanted to experience. Excuse me? He heard as he turned his head to see the nice girl from before, as she had just been healed by Recovery Girl and managed to walk over to him. Thank you for saving me back there, she said as she bowed slightly. I probably would have been a goner if you hadn't saved me, she said as Izuku blushed and tried to hide his face in his hands. No, it's alright. You looked like you needed help, and I just couldn't leave you to get crushed like that, so, my body just moved on its own. I'm glad you're okay though, he said as the girl smiled at him, thinking that his stuttering was kind of cute, but then frowned as she looked at the boy. Did I hear you right before? You only got 15 points? She asked as he stopped stuttering and hung his head. Why yeah, I only managed to get 15 points, he said as her eyes widened. Oh, my gosh, I'm sorry, if it hadn't been for me, you probably would have gotten more points. You failed because of me, I'm so sorry, she said as he turned around to face her, as she seemed to be feeling guilty about his lack of points. No, it wasn't your fault, honestly, I just didn't get enough in time. That was my fault, not yours. he said, embarrassed as she shook her head. But you would have gotten more points if you hadn't tried to save me. It's my fault that you didn't pass. Not to mention you got hurt because of me. It's my fault, she said as Izuku instantly shook his head and smiled. It's alright. I didn't think I'd pass anyway, and honestly, I'm just glad you're alright. Because I guess that makes us even? He said as she looked confused. You helped me out this morning. If it hadn't been for you, I would have been face first on the floor. So, I guess we both saved each other. Plus, you were nice to me. I couldn't just let you get hurt, he said as he smiled at her while she looked at him in awe. Not only that, but she rescued you from falling to your death, so you should thank her for that too, Recovery Girl said as she was within earshot. You did? He said as she blinked and then nodded. Wow, thanks. I guess I owe again, huh? He said as she just stared at his smiling face. Looking at the boy, she was honestly stunned to know that the reason he saved her was because she had been nice to him this morning. Stunned to know that he willingly risked his safety and his place at UA just to make sure she didn't get crushed and saved her when no one else would. She smiled sadly as she nodded to the boy, deep down knowing that she was the reason he wasn't going to pass. Because he risked his life to save hers. And now, she was thinking of some way she could pay him back for his bravery, no matter what it would cost. By the way, he suddenly said as he held out a hand to her. I'm Izuku. Izuku Midoriya, forgetting his shyness for a moment and offering her a welcoming hand, as she blinked but then smiled as she shook it. Ochako Uraraka, she said as she smiled back. By the what happened to the 0-pointer? I remember getting hit and then passing out, but what happened after that? Oh. Well, you did this weird glowing thing and then you destroyed its arm. Like whoosh. Then punched it in the face and sent it flying. It was amazing. Really, that was me. I did that? Yeah? Don't you remember? Ah well, I don't remember much after getting hit, but that might be because, his voice was slowly drowned out and turned into stutters as Tenya just stared at the pair as she was recapping him on what happened and how the 0-pointer was destroyed. His mind was racing with questions that soon found answers as he pieced together the puzzle. I see, so if the exam is set up like that, then that means both of them, he said as he watched the two converse. Later. UA Infirmary. You stupid, reckless idiot. How many times have I told you that your quirk doesn't make you invincible? It just allows you to handle more pain. Not all of it. What were you thinking? She yelled as Izuku shrunk down low as the old lady before him continued to chew him out. You were just like All Might was when he was your age, always reckless and never thinking ahead. You could have gotten yourself killed. Are you trying to give me an ulcer? She screamed as Izuku hung his head. Sorry, I didn't mean to, my body just moved on its own, he said as he hung his head and kneeled on the floor. The woman sighed as she leaned back in her chair. I know, you were just trying to help that girl back there, which I applaud you for. But you need to be more careful, there is only so much we know about your quirk and the limits it can handle. We still don't even know what else it can do. You got lucky because that gravity girl saved you from falling to your death. But how are you going to be a hero if you can't use your body anymore? She asked as once again Izuku apologized. Sorry, he said as he continued to hang his head, until he remembered something and he looked up. That reminds me, the nice girl Uraraka, told me that I was the one that defeated the 0-pointer. Is it true? Did I do that? He asked as the woman nodded. Yes, it would appear there is another ability to you, endurance, quirk, one that myself or even All Might was unprepared for. She said as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a device as a hologram appeared before her. It showed the moment he got hit by the 0-point villain and then the moment he emerged glowing like a red sun, as Izuku could only stare at the destruction he caused to the machine. It seems that whenever your body is subjected to a vast amount of damage, your body activates a secondary ability within you. This is just a guess, but I think your body releases a sudden shot of adrenaline that courses through your body, increasing your power and abilities tenfold and activated the human body's natural fight or flight instinct. Which is obviously what your body chose, she said with a glare as the boy hung his head. But I think that maybe your endurance quirk and one for all temporarily combined to save your life, allowing you access to your 100% limit of one for all and its terrifying abilities. I theorized this because I noticed that whenever you summon one for all, your body is covered in theses, veins of power. That is a visual representation of one for all. in you. Just like how All Might's representation is his muscular form. She said as Izuku just looked at the footage. What I also can guess, is that your body shuts down the pain receptors in your body so that you can ignore the immense amount of pain that you would be suffering. Which was why I guess you didn't react when both your arms and legs broke after hitting the thing. This is dangerous. Without pain receptors your body can't tell how much damage it's taking and could lead to serious harm. Your body could continue fighting while your bones break and your muscles tear. You could end up paralyzed from the strain alone if you're not careful, she said as Izuku felt a little scared. But doesn't my quirk build up an endurance to pain? Wouldn't I eventually be able to handle it? He asked as she shook her head. It does, but there is only so much that the human body can handle before it gives out, even yours. That's the natural thing about our bodies. The older we get, the weaker we become. Nothing lasts forever, it's just the fact of life, she said as Izuku processed what she said. On that note, I highly recommend you don't forcibly try and activate this adrenaline shot that you have. It's too dangerous and we don't know what else it can do. That quirk of yours, it could kill you, and then you'd never become a hero, she said as the boy looked down sadly at his bandaged hand and nodded. Thanks for the concern, but I don't think you have to worry about that. I didn't get enough points, I failed, he said as he sighed. I wouldn't get too worked up, there's still a week before the results are posted. Who knows, you may actually get in, she said as the boy shook his head. I doubt it, he said as he got up, picked up his backpack from the door and left. Recovery Girl looked at the boy as she felt sad for him, sad that she couldn't tell him about the rescue points or the fact that he more than likely passed after that brave performance. But she was a teacher and a faculty member at UA and she couldn't reveal that secret. But boy would he be in for a surprise a week from now. 1 week later, Midoriya residents' dead fish eyes stared at Izuku as he stared back with the same dead-eye look with a small smile on his face. His expression matching the fish that he was having for dinner as he just seemed dead on the inside. Izuku. 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 His mother's voice finally reached through as he blinked. Are you alright? Why are you staring at that fish vacantly? She asked with a worried look on her face. Sorry. I'm okay, he said as he went back to eating his dinner. Inko looking worried at her son as he had been behaving that way for the past week. It had been happening ever since he came home from the entrance exam and could guess that he didn't do well in the exam. She wanted to cheer him up and make him feel better about not getting into his dream school, but she had trouble confronting him as she was worried anything she said could make him even more depressed. So, she tried to choose her words carefully. The result should be arriving today or tomorrow, right? Yeah, I think it's just amazing that you even applied for UA. Yeah, Inko looked sadly as he continued to stare off into space, seeing as she wasn't going to be able to get through to him. Izuku looked off into space with his phone in his left hand, and a gripper in his right as he absently squeezed on the small device. His mind was going over everything that happened last week as he evaluated the possibility of him getting into UA, and so far, it wasn't looking likely. He knew by self-evaluation that he just passed the written portion of the entrance exam, but knew that was cancelled out by the meager 15 points he earned in the practical exam, which was apparently the deciding vote to get into UA, but also his mind was focused on this new ability that he had in his quirk. Adrenaline shot. A power-up that gained him access to his 100% limit of one for all, and how it had combined with his endurance quirk to make him more powerful, but could only be activated if he was in an extreme amount of pain, or close enough to it. But he also thought about the risks it ran and how if he wasn't careful, it could kill him. He glanced back to his mother as she was grabbing a book with her quirk. He dared not tell her about this new ability because then she would only worry about him and maybe even try to persuade him to stop being a hero. He loved his mother and all the hard work she did to raise him after his father left, but she worried about him too much and treated him like he was a fine china doll that could crack at the simplest touch. He didn't like lying to her as he felt that he was betraying her trust. But then again, he hadn't told her about All Might either, as he wanted All Might to continue his job as the symbol of peace. It was best that he didn't tell her, not yet anyway. He placed the gripper on the table as he reached down and grabbed the dumbbell that was on the ground as he began to do some reps. His mind then wandered to his idol, All Might, as he hadn't heard from him in a week. He started to wonder if he had disappointed him because he failed to get into UA and that's why he hadn't contacted him. It made sense to him anyway, that would be his reason. He All Might had put all his trust and all his faith in him, and even with the month he got to master just 1% of One for All, he still failed the man. All Might had seen potential in him and he squandered it during the last minutes of the test. But he kept thinking back to the moment the nice girl, Ochako, was pinned under that piece of rubble, and he knew he couldn't just leave her like that. It just didn't feel right if he did. So he did what he thought was right. He did what he thought was the right thing to do. All Might, you, Izuku thought as he continued to lift the weights. Suddenly the door slammed open as his mother came crawling into the room, her arms waving all about as she tried to say something, but came out in stutters. Izuku, she said as she then held up a letter. It's here, it came, she said as Izuku just stared at the envelope that bore UA's official seal. Izuku's room. Inko nervously paced outside her son's room as she waited for the boy to emerge and tell her the news. She was a mixture of many emotions at the moment. She was fearful, she was nervous, she was filled with dread, she was drowning in worry, and finally, she was grasping at a small bit of hope as she prayed that whatever was in that letter would brighten his mood and make him smile again. She wanted her son to fulfill his dream and hopefully make up for the lonely years he spent as a quirkless child. While in the room, Izuku was just staring at the envelope as he was too afraid to open it. He knew what it was going to say, that he didn't meet their requirements and that he should try somewhere else. So why did they bother sending it? Was it to let him know officially that he failed? Or was it just a formality thing and were required to do it? He didn't know why, but he knew that whatever was in the letter, he knew what it was going to say. So, gripping the edges of the letter, he pulled with all his strength as the envelope ripped out and he prepared to read the letter. Clink. Suddenly a small clink was heard as he looked down at a small device that was now resting on his desk. Okay, he admitted he didn't see that coming. But before he could question it, the small device began to light up and I am here. As a projection. The sudden sound of All Might's voice caused Izuku to jump as the image of All Might in his hero form appeared on the projection. All Might. But I thought this was from UA. The man on the screen merely smirked as he pointed at the camera. I had to do some paperwork that took some time, so I wasn't able to contact you, sorry my boy. Because I did come to this town to teach at UA, remember? He said as Izuku's mind clicked at that. Oh yeah, Recovery Girl said he was going to teach there, how could I forget? That's right, now, what? I need to wrap it up. But, there is something I must talk to him about, it's going to push everything else back. Alright, okay. Izuku stared in confusion as his idol talked to the cameraman, wondering if they forgot to edit this bit out before sending it to him. Anyway, young Midoriya, even though you passed the written exam, you only scored 15 points in the practical. And as you know, that is not enough to get you into UA. Izuku hung his head at this, as he had already known this for the past week. The feeling of frustration and anger looming over him as he knew that he had failed, so why were they doing this to him? If that were all to it, his head shot up as he looked at the man. Did you know in my previous life, I was an entertainer? He said as he then pointed to a monitor. Behold. He said as the monitor suddenly changed and Ochako Uraraka appeared on the monitor as she appeared to be standing in front of Present Mike in what looked to be one of the teacher's lounges of UA. Uraraka? He said as he wondered what she was doing there. Excuse me, she began to say as the video paused for a second. While you were busy in Recovery Girl's office, this young lady came right to us after the exam. It seems she came to negotiate with us. He said as Izuku's eyes widened at this. Did she go to talk with them? But why, he wondered, why would she do that? You're probably wondering, negotiating what? Well, stop wondering and watch the screen, he said as he pressed play on the remote. The person with the curly hair, he's the one with freckles and a plain face. Plain face? He wondered as she continued to talk. His name was Izuku. Izuku Midoriya, she said as she remembered his name. I was wondering if it's possible to share some of my points with him, she said as his eyes widened even further. What? He thought, what did she just say? Share her points? But why? Why would she want to do that and risk her own chance to enter UA for a guy like him? Why? You see, he saved my life, he ran back to help me when no one else would, and he nearly died trying to save me. And because of it, he didn't get enough points. I have 28 points, so I was wondering if you could give him some of mine? Just enough to let him in, please? said as Izuku could only stare in shock. What was she doing? Why was she willing to help him when no one else in his life ever would? His mind flashing back to Bakugo as he called him useless and asked mockingly what he could do as a quirkless person. His heart hammering in his chest as he gripped his fist. At least give him the points he lost because of me. Another flash and the pro heroes who chewed him out appeared as they scolded him for trying to rescue Bakugo, telling him there was no reason for him to interfere and risk his life like that. That there was no reason at all for him to put himself in danger. He saved me. He nearly died trying to save me, and he failed because of me, please. She begged and pleaded with the man as Izuku could only stare back at the monitor as hung his head. His mind not able to comprehend what he had just seen, as someone tried to help him for the first time in his life. Someone who tried to help him achieve his dream of becoming a hero. Someone who didn't see him as the useless and weak Deku. Someone who cared about him other than his own mother. Someone who wanted him to become a hero. The video stopped as All Might continued to face towards the monitor. You've only had your quirk for 10 months now, and already you're using it to inspire others into action, he said as Izuku smiled at the praise. I should probably tell you now that the entrance exam does not grade only by villain points, he said as Izuku looked back up. The video continued to play as Present Mike placed a hand on her head. Even if you ask to, you can't share points with him, but I doubt that's going to be a problem for him. So, do not fret for him, young female listener, I'm positive he'll be fine, he said as the video then cut out and All Might walked back on screen. Answer me this, young Midoriya, what kind of hero course would turn away people who save others and do the right thing? The answer, there is none, he exclaimed as he pointed to the boy. Rescuing people and doing the right thing is part of the job. Call it lip service or cheesy all you want. But being a hero is all about the cheesy lip service that is put into practice every day. He then smirked as he held out his arms. That's why we also grade, on rescue points. Izuku's eyes widened as the man smirked at him. And they are given by a panel of judges, that grade and determine who shows these noble attributes. And you, Izuku Midoriya, showed the most out of anyone in the entire exam. Reckless as it may be, and even though you brought great risk to yourself, I can assure you that every judge agreed that you earned it, especially after facing the 0-point villain in such a spectacular fashion, he proclaimed as he pointed to the boy. Izuku Midoriya, 60 rescue points. Combine that with you 15 villain points. You earned second place on the leaderboard, he said as Izuku could not believe what he was hearing. And while we were at it, we gave Ochako Uraraka 46 rescue points, an extra point because we wanted to, making her tie for the third place with another brave applicant, he proclaimed as Izuku could still not believe what just happened to him. He got in, somehow, by some strange miracle of luck he managed to get in, and make it to the top 3 like he swore he would. He fulfilled his promise to himself. To All Might. He made it to UA. All Might smirked as he looked at the boy on the screen. You both pass, congratulations, he as Izuku could feel the tears threatening to spill out of his eyes. This is crazy, absolutely crazy, he said as the man then held out his hand, almost as if he was in the same room as him and smirked. Come, young Midoriya, this is your hero academia. The UA faculty had met in the dimly lit room beneath the training facility 1 week prior. As they talked about who should be in which class, Hai glanced at the scoreboard of students who had left an impression on the teachers. Bakugo Katsuki, who scored 77 villain points and 0 rescue points, was at the top of the list. Izuku Midoriya, who finished in second place with 75 points, was right below him after scoring 60 rescue points and 15 villain points. Ochako Uraraka, who scored 28 villain points and 46 rescue points, and a boy by the name of Eijiro Kirishima, who scored 39 villain points and 35 rescue points, were tied for third place, giving them a combined score of 74 points. Present Mike and his fellow faculty staff members were standing in the control room when they remarked, "We had quite the turnout this year, huh?" The female voice said, "You're telling me, first we have Bakugo Katsuki, who managed to get first place with 0 rescue points, and it turned out to be Nomori Kayama, the hero in Midnight, who was 18 years old. In the second half, when everyone was slowing down, he used his flashy quirk to keep bringing them close to him and counter-attacking them." A male voice that looked like a skull and was wearing a long trench coat said. He used the faux villains targeting program to his advantage by drawing them out into the open. He was Ecotoplasm, the pro-hero. I thought it was pretty amazing, a proof of his resilience, he remarked, getting a nod from the other. They all nodded and she said, although he could possibly lose the savage look on his face. The image showed his face as he took a certain joy in taking down the robots. Agreed, they all exclaimed simultaneously as the boy in question sneezed and began yelling at his mother. Although I must admit, this is the first time we've ever had two candidates tied for third place. Kirishima and young Uraraka both proved themselves to be respectable candidates in scoring both rescue points and villains, Midnight remarked, nodding to the boy whose skin turned all jagged and sharp and the girl with her gravity abilities. Present Mike said, presenting pictures of the second-place finisher facing off against the pretend villain. Then there's the one who came in second place, Izuku Midoriya. He scored only 15 villains points but a massive 60 rescue points, the highest rescue score out of the entire lot. It's quite clear he is the opposite of the first-place candidate, both in personality and quirk abilities, it said. Images show Izuku punching the faux villains with One for All, then absorbing damage with endurance and launching it back. Yes, his quirk. He has quite the strange one it seems. From the looks of it, he has an enhancement type quirk that allows him to increase his strength, but can also absorb damage and turn it into power, which Recovery Girl was able to confirm herself. The video depicts Izuku risking his life to save Ochako Uraraka, a fellow examinee, even though he knew it might endanger him. He also showed the best example of heroism, the statement reads. They all fell silent as they watched the video of his fight with the zero-pointer. But let's get to the main source of the problem, his other ability. Present Mike said, looking at the image of Izuku shrouded in red energy, there have been many that have taken on the faux villain, but I've never seen anyone damage it to that degree or send it flying to the other end of the battlefield like that. The man had dark, shaggy hair and a cloth wrapped around his neck. But the damage he suffered to both activate this ability and from the after effect, it's like a young child whose quirk has just manifested. Which it was, the diminutive figure said, her ears resembling a mouse. Recovery Girl confirmed it and has been acting as his personal physician for the past 10 months. But since she's only the medic, however, she's impartial to the judging, he explained to the other people in the room. Really? But I thought quirks only manifested when you're 4 years old or younger? As everyone turned to watch the boy punch the zero-pointer away from the others, he said, it seems he was a special case, something about his body waiting until it was ready or more developed to handle the strain, which is why Recovery Girl is documenting it. To see if similar cases will show up in the future. The man with the shaggy hair focused on the boy and the power he possessed, looking back at the picture. Dagoba Beach. The evening following the acceptance letters opening. There was a time, 10 months ago, when Dagoba Beach was so overrun with trash that residents avoided it. Because of its unsightliness and ugly appearance, people felt free to illegally dispose of anything they wanted into the enormous pile, knowing that no one would be able to tell the difference. That was no longer the case because the beach was now regarded as one of the most romantic places to visit due to its improved cleanliness. The local newspapers inquired as to who had dedicated so much time to cleaning, something that many had written off as unachievable. Some said it was an attempt by the city council to increase tourism. Others said it was the deed of a brave hero who used a strong quirk to clean it up because he could no longer bear the sight. And still others believed it was a plot by the government to use the scrap metal to create WMDs. Those were not taken seriously by anyone. All of them, though, shared the sightings of a green-haired individual picking up trash while being yelled at by a skeletal, blonde man. However, their destination remained a mystery. However, that was really unimportant because there was still clear access to the beach, allowing people to enjoy the sun and surf once more. On the little lookout, young couples could propose to each other. Something that made All Might grin. All Might, or more accurately, Toshinori Yagi in his normal form, grinned and turned to face the beach. He was still in awe of how his youthful successor had cleaned this beach in just 9 months and squeezed in an additional month to use the power of One for All. It was evidence of the boy's self-discipline and determination to realize his dream of becoming a hero. All Might was relieved that he had picked the ideal recipient to inherit One for All. Then, he heard footsteps behind him. Since he had only spoken to him an hour earlier, he already knew who it was and wanted to congratulate him on entering and discuss the unusual power boost he had unlocked. The boy cried out and he turned just in time to see him. He exclaimed, "All Might," as the man winced and spat blood. "Who the heck's that? All Might? Where?" he heard from behind him, realizing that the boy had just revealed who he was and that a young couple was watching them. This needed to be contained by him. He growled, "Repeat after me. I got the wrong person," as the boy flinched in realization of what he had just done. He exclaimed, I got the wrong person," as the couple appeared dissatisfied but came to terms with it, allowing All Might and Izuku to exhale in relief. The boy apologized, and he gave him a sharp glare before breathing a sigh of relief. But then he raised his hand with a sly smile. "Congratulations on getting in," he said while giving a high five to the male. "Just so you know, I didn't tell them about our connection in case you were worried. They know about yours and Recovery Girl's, but since she was the medic for the event she doesn't get to vote. I'm telling you this, because you're the type that tends to think that's cheating, right? She and I weren't one of the judges," he said while bowing his head and nodding. "Thanks for the concern, though I am still surprised that you're going to be teaching at UA, even though I already knew that. So that's why you came here, isn't it? I mean your head office is Roppongi in Minato, Tokyo at." Izuku winced as he broke off his fanboying, but he nodded as he returned to the beach. "Stop right there." Izuku recalled him saying he was looking for a successor after learning about his own quirk. "I couldn't tell anyone until the school announced it. The only reason you knew is that I took you to see Recovery Girl and she mentioned me going to work there," he said. "But the main reason I decided to work there was because they made me an offer to help look for a potential successor among the candidates. It would have made looking for a successor much easier." The man turned to face his hands instead of turning to face him. "So, that means you were originally going to choose someone from UA, right? One who probably had more time and training with his or her own quirk?" he asked. "I guess that makes sense. I only just discovered mine and even I still don't know how it fully works," he said with a sigh. He turned to All Might and said, "All I can do is 1% right now, but that clearly isn't enough. It would have been easier if you chose someone else, huh? Kid, I didn't expect you to get this power and instantly master it in a day. Hell, even I had difficulty learning to use One for All when my master gave it to me. A man who just sprouts a tail can't be expected to do any amazing tricks right off the bat. It's going to take time and a lot of effort, but I'm positive you're going to master it. So, stop putting yourself down already, Prince of Nonsense," he said as Izuku chuckled slightly at this. "Also, don't forget to follow your heart, because when you stop listening to your heart, you've already lost," he said, gesturing to Izuku to nod. "Recall what I told you before the exam. When you're fighting, you must focus on the battle. Don't let other things distract you and keep fighting. I told you that you deserved my authority, since you've validated for me what I've been knowing about you for some time. That you exemplify what it means to be a hero and what selflessness really means. I couldn't have asked for more than that. You saved that girl even though doing so would have meant failing. Thus, keep in mind that I selected you to inherit the power of One for All, out of all people on the planet. Never take that for granted," he said, causing Izuku to smile a little and feel better right away. Izuku looked up as he said, "But I will admit, you may have the hardest challenge of anyone who has ever inherited One for All, out of all the people who have inherited it. Particularly with that peculiarity of yours. And speaking of which, Recovery Girl shared with me her hypothesis regarding your adrenaline shot. Do you recall anything about that experience? Specifically how it shut down your nervous system and allowed you to access your 100% limit of One for All? How did it feel?" Izuku blinked and tried to recall as he asked. "Well, I don't really remember anything after I got hit, but if I had to sum it up, I guess it felt like a sensation? Like an unexpected burst of energy. It was completely different, but it was almost like when I summoned 1% into my arms or legs. Does that even make sense?" The man shrugged and he asked. "It sounds to me a little bit like what Recovery Girl had previously told you. Your body spiked endurance by releasing a lot of adrenaline, which it then used to filter the entire 100% limit of One for All, and double its strength." He bowed down and picked up 2 spray cans from the beach. "And by shutting down the pain receptors in your nervous system, your body was untethered by fear and pain, allowing you to do that. To the 0-pointer. This complicates matters a little bit because, in the event that your body is incapable of sensing pain, you may not know when to quit and may even endanger your life." He transformed into his muscular form and crushed the cans. So, let's take things slow and build up your body more to handle more pain and help you master one for all, and one day you too will be a magnificent hero. Izuku's resolve and determination were burning brightly in his eyes once more, and all he could do was stare in amazement before nodding. Is that all of your might? Not at all. From where did he originate? Izuku could only stare at All Might, who had a bead of sweat streaming down his face, as a bead of silence fell between them. Leave now. Midoriya, young one, as they both ran out of there, he said. All Might only looked back at the young protege who had followed him, knowing that the flames that had been passed on to him were small and weak, but that with time and exposure to the winds and rains of life, they would one day burn bigger and brighter than his, while his own would undoubtedly dim and fade as his job would be done. While the couple fled, Izuku looked up at the back of his idol, hoping that one day he could be as great a hero as him. As they ran towards the new horizon, All Might thought, yeah, that's pretty deep. April. Start of the UA semester. What tissues do you have? Yes, Mum. What about your handkerchief? How's your handkerchief doing? Your handkerchief? As Izuku was putting on his shoes at the door, Inko Midoriya worried. I've got it. I will be running late, Izuku said, getting off the step and walking toward the door, while Inko watched her son and held her hand to her chest. Izuku, she says, and the boy turns to face her, a hint of irritation on his face from being anxious about being late for school. The woman simply smiles and puts her hands close to her heart as he asks, what? She commented, you look really cool, glancing at his school uniform. The only thing that was visible were his shoes and his tie, which was tucked into his shirt. Still, she thought it made him seem cool. Izuku blushes slightly as he looks at his mother, stunned. He then nodded and grinned before saying a brief goodbye to his mother and walking out the door. The first day of UA was today, and Izuku's first day of high school, marking the beginning of his journey to become a hero. Izuku arrived at the UA entrance after a brief train ride into the city and a swift sprint up the hill. As he dashed through the school, UA High was well known for having an acceptance rate of less than 1 in 300 students, indicating that only 36 students are admitted to UA each year, where 2 classes are created out of those 36. Izuku was thrilled to have made it into the 36, but he was also very anxious. It meant that he was now expected to rise to the level of All Might, a great and accomplished hero. People would be evaluating him based on his academic standing and the potential impact he would have in the hero. In addition, having acknowledged All Might's strength meant that he would eventually have to succeed All Might as the symbol of peace when All Might retired. Thus, yes, he had a lot on the line, so he had to act now. However, at the moment, he was having trouble finding his homeroom. This place was enormous. He hurried down the hallway, saying, 1A, 1A, ah man, this school is way too big. He stopped as he found himself facing a large door that was several sizes too big, saying, ah, here it is 1A. Looking at the sheer size of the door, he exclaimed, it's huge. He pondered, was it made for the larger students? Since it was possible given that, since the phenomenon that gave each person on Earth a quirk, people have been born in all shapes and sizes. He thought about the tall teen Tenya and his former classmate Bakugo, thinking to himself, this is it, my first day at high school. From now on I'll be alongside everyone who was chosen in the entrance exam. I just hope. Those 2 were placed in 1B. Remove your feet from the desk at once. Don't you think that's disrespectful to your classmates? As a matter of fact, I don't. What middle school did you go to, you side character? He really ought to have anticipated this. He should have expected this. He would, of course, be assigned to this class with these 2. How come he wouldn't be? The universe simply enjoys playing tricks on him. He watched the 2 argue like a long-married couple, and he sighed. He raised and lowered his arms in a robotic gesture before saying, my name is Tenya Iida, and I attended Some Academy. Iida winced at this and Bakugo exclaimed, Some? Well, aren't you an elite? Seems like I have a reason to crush you after all. Izuku used to ask himself that question a lot as he was growing up. Me, are you truly aiming to be a hero? Iida gave an involuntary flinch at Izuku's fixed gaze as she realized he was standing at the door. Izuku felt every eye in the classroom staring at him, and he said, you're to everyone else. But before he could say anything, Iida approached him. "Good morning. My name is Tenya Iida from Some. Izuku, I'm Midoriya, nice to meet you." "I heard you the first time," she said, causing the boy to blink. "Yes, of course," he replied, clearing his throat with his hand before giving the boy a serious glance. Izuku blinked and he said, "Midoriya, you realized that there was something else to the practical exam, didn't you?" "I had no idea, I was blind to the truth and I completely misjudged you, even belittled you in front of others. But the way you divined the truth and took down that 0-pointer, I hate to admit it, but you are truly better than me," he said as Izuku continued to stare in disbelief. He realized the boy in front of him was vastly overestimating him, and he said to himself, "No, I'm not. I didn't realize until a week after." A voice from behind said, "That hair. Ah, it's you, Izuku. Izuku Midoriya, right?" Izuku spun to see Ochako behind him. "You passed, just like Mr. Present Mike said." "That's amazing," she exclaimed, blushing and trying to hide in his own arms as soon as he saw her. "Aha. It's the one, Ochako Uraraka, the nice girl." The girl appeared pleased to see him, so he thought. Then he got a chance to look at her, seeing that she was wearing the female school uniform of UA. Izuku was thinking to himself, "She looks really nice in a school uniform," while Ochako was complimenting him and acting out his punch against the 0-point shooter. Meanwhile, a deep rage was rising inside of Bakugo, and he was glaring at the boy. He recalled being informed in February that others were also being admitted to UA but also Deku. He practically gave Deku the order to go somewhere else when he heard that, acting out of uncontrollable rage. However, the little shit actually stood up to him of all people, instead of retreating as he used to. There was a problem with this image. It must have been a sudden event for weak and useless Deku to confront him. And Bakugo was not at all fond of it. How in the world did that tiny shit stain get in there? It's Deku. Not even that he belongs here. Fucking Deku. I'm going to investigate this to the end. He scowled at the boy, who was still blushing from the attention the round-faced girl was giving him, thinking to himself. Izuku just hides in his arms, saying how close she was to him. I wonder what the opening ceremony is like. Or are we going to be dealing with the guidance counselor stuff today? Oh, and the teachers. I wonder what they're like. I'm like so anxious right now, Uraraka exclaimed. If you're here to make friends, then go home. All of a sudden, there was a hush and Izuku, Uraraka, and Iida turned to face the voice, peering down at the hallway floor. The sight of a dark yellow sleeping bag and what appeared to be a disheveled man inside drew their attention right away. The strange man in the sleeping bag dug around in his bag, pulled out a juice pack, and drank it. This is the heroics department after all, he said in a stale, bored voice. The man had the class in a state of shock as they all just stared at him. Who in the world is this guy? As the man rose and exited the sleeping bag, they all thought. It became clear that he was a tall man with black hair that hung down in front of his face to the shoulder. A long, thin mustache, and a half-shaven beard. He was dressed in all black, including black pants and a dark long-sleeve shirt. He wore a scarf around his neck, composed of several dozen loose bands, next to them. They all stared at him when he remarked, "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, you lot have no common sense whatsoever. Is the instructor present?" As the man stood in front of them, they thought. Everyone cringed as he said, "My name is Shota Aizawa, I'll be homeroom teacher, nice to meet you." Is he the homeroom instructor? Everyone let out a yell, and Izuku arched an eyebrow. Shota Aizawa. I think I recognize that name from somewhere? The man said, "All right, we've wasted enough time," as he reached into the back and produced a dark blue, shirt-sleeved jumpsuit with 2 white stripes on the arms, an A that extended from the stomach to the pants, and a stylized U at the top. "Put this one and shove off to the gym," he said, causing everyone to blink and follow the man. When Toshinori came across Shota Aizawa's file and read over the man's history as 1A's homeroom teacher, his eyes widened. In the meantime, Toshinori was looking through the UA teacher's record as he was familiarizing himself with the teachers he was going to be working with, and who knew his secret. Oh boy, if Midoriya has him as his homeroom teacher, then he's in for a rough time. PE grounds. UA. AN awkward APPRECIPIATION test. As the class of 1A stood in the expansive PE grounds of UA High, A lot of voices could be heard. The 20 students who had gathered there had just changed into their sports uniforms and were wondering what the man was up to. When he revealed his plans, they were more than a little surprised. However, what about the inaugural event? And the meeting of the guidance counselors? The man just stared back at Ochako with a bored expression on his face. Ochako said, "This is the heroics department. You cannot waste time on pointless activities like guidance counselors or opening ceremonies if you want to be a hero." They became a little tense as he continued. "You all know this school's reputation for freedom on campus. Well, that freedom applies to the teachers as well. You kids have been doing the physical fitness tests since middle school, right? Unless you used your quirks at any point during the entire time you were involved, right?" Everyone nodded as he asked. With the exception of Izuku, who only developed his quirk 10 months ago. This occurred as a result of the nation's continued use of students' non-quirks-based standardized averages. "It isn't logical." He turned to Bakugo and said, "But that is mostly because the Ministry of Education is procrastinating and having trouble finding a way to accurately measure what a person is capable of." Bakugo Katsuki, "I understand you won the practical exam." The teenager blinked but nodded as he continued, "In middle school, what was your best softball throw performance?" The teenager squinted as he asked. He replied, 67 meters, as the man threw him a ball, which he managed to catch. The teenager looked at the ball in his hands and smiled as he stepped out onto the softball field. "Now, try doing it again, but this time with your quirk," he said. "You can do whatever you want, as long as you don't leave the circle, clear?" The teenager nodded, and he said, pulling back his arm as he got ready to throw. Gesturing, he thought to himself, "I'll just add a little shockwave to augment the pitch, that will show that useless Deku who's top dog around here." He reared back his arm, threw with all his strength, and let out a cry. Die. The ball was propelled through the air and high into the sky by the blast, pushing it even farther, and he cried out as a sizable explosion burst in his hand. Izuku's only thought as the ball returned to the field was, "Die?" You need to understand your own skill level to the fullest before doing anything else. Gazing at the number on the machine, people's eyes widened instantly. This is the only rational way to form the foundation of a hero, he said as Aizawa held up a small device. 705 meters. Everyone exclaimed, startled by the distance but also filled with excitement at the realization that they now had the chance to fully embrace their quirks. Having spent their entire lives being forbidden by social conventions from utilizing their quirks, or innate talents, they were thrilled to finally be able to unleash their full potential. "Really? That seems like a lot of fun. Next, I'd like a try." "We're free to use our quirks however we please." That's exactly what you would anticipate from the hero course, man. But with his hair casting a shadow over his eyes, Aizawa did not appear impressed. "This looks like fun, huh?" The man stared at them and said, "You're going to be here for the next 3 years and that's how you're going to go about it." The way he said it sent a shiver down their spine. You must be thinking that this will be all fun and games. Many people started to feel afraid of him, and a sense of impending doom seemed to surround him. "All right, let's play this like a game if that's what you all think it is. The individual who receives the lowest scores across all 8 of these tests will be deemed hopeless, and will be allowed to kiss their seat at UA goodbye," he said as his eyes showed nothing but seriousness. Izuku and the others felt a surge of fear in their chest, hoping the man was joking even though he looked at them with a crazed look on his face. "See, here at UA," he then grinned and looked out at the class, saying, "We teachers are given the freedom to teach or dispense with students as we please. Welcome to UA's heroics department." Looking down at his hand, Izuku appeared slightly afraid, the entire thing trembling from the fear that filled every nerve in his body. He knew that at the moment he was only in control of 1% of One for All, and he was afraid that might not be enough. Sure, he had his own quirk, endurance, but he had to hurt himself in order to activate it. How in the world was he going to do that and use the power of One for All? He clutched his fist, trying to steady himself, because if he failed enough of the trials, he was going to be kicked out before he was even allowed inside. "This man, he can effectively end my dream if I don't succeed. I need to pass these trials," he thought, trying to put on a brave face, but faltering as the man merely stared at them all. "No, I need to stay calm. I at least have 1% of control, and that is honestly a lot better than nothing," he said to himself as he looked up at himself. The last person to arrive will be banished. However, today is the first day of class. It's simply not fair, Ochako said, looking shocked at this. Aizawa listed off as everyone halted: natural disasters, massive casualties, and out-of-control villains. These are only a few examples of unexpected events that may occur. Unfairness abounds in Japan. As heroes, it is our responsibility to put an end to that and make the world safe again. Therefore, you can stop talking to your friends while eating at the nearby McDonald's. Given that you will spend the next 3 years at UA will come with hardship after hardship. In this UA we challenge our pupils to go above and beyond, plus ultra, in order to produce the next wave of heroes who will bring peace back to the world. And I don't expect any less from anyone I instruct, he declared, and all of a sudden everyone was resolved. And now that the protest is done, it's time for someone to take the lead. Who will it be? First trail. 50-meter run. The first event was a 50-meter dash, in which 2 students, identified by their numbers, would be called out and instructed to run, using their quirks to cross the finish line. The first 2 students were Mina Ishido, a girl with pink skin and small horns on her head, and the blonde boy Izuku had met in the exam, Yuga Aoyama, who could only shoot himself across the lane twice with his belly button quirk because doing so hurt his stomach. Tenya and a girl with features resembling frogs, whose name he found out was Suyu Asui, came next. While the girl used her frog physiology to hop across and make it in 5.58 seconds, Tenya's engine quirk, which allowed him to propel himself at high speeds thanks to the engine-like growths coming out of his legs, made it clear that this was his area of expertise. Ochako, on the other hand, used her zero-gravity quirk to lose the gravitational field on her clothes and shoes but only managed to come in at 7.15. When Izuku's turn came around, he had to face off against Bakugo Katsuki, an old classmate who appeared to be beaming with excitement about facing Deku. Izuku prepared by activating 1% of One for All as the timer went off, and Bakugo quickly outran him, reaching the finish line in 4.13 seconds by using his explosions to propel himself across the track, while Izuku, with only 1% of One for All in his legs, finished in 6.25 seconds, which was a slight improvement over his previous time of 7.49 seconds at middle school. While Aizawa just stared at the boy, Bakugo could only glare, wondering what had happened to the boy to change him so much since 11 months ago. Luckily, he didn't notice the red veins that had appeared and disappeared over the boy's legs. But that isn't enough, there are still 7 more tests to go. I need to do better, Izuku said to himself as he gripped his knees. Second trial. Grip exam. Izuku measured his strength as he raised the grip test and widened his eyes at the number on the scale. He held the grip test in his hand and slowly applied pressure to the scale by channeling 1% of One for All into his hand, by visualizing an egg in the microwave and lowering the wattage to 1%. A loud exclamation greeted him as he turned to see a boy with cylinder-like growths on his elbows marveling at a large teen with multiple appendages growing out of his body. At 175 kilograms, with just 1% of One for All, it was certainly a lot stronger than what he used to be. 540 pounds. How come you're a gorilla? Whoa, there's an octopus. The tall silent teen just nodded as the smaller teen, sporting purple balls on his head, looked up at the taller teen. He said, octopuses are sexy, and Izuku was both depressed to learn how much stronger the other teen was and frightened by the small teen with the strange expression on his face. What was up with that kid, really? Trial 3, long jump standing. Izuku found some hope in the standing long jump, as he used 1% to get through the sand trap and onto the other side, watching as others jumped over, some using their quirks to help them get over, like Yuga, while Bakugo just about flew over with help from his explosions. Bakugo was a little miffed that Deku wasn't failing as badly as he had anticipated, but he ignored it, telling himself over and over again that Deku would still fail because he was useless and that nothing could change. But he was going to be proven wrong very soon. Trial 4. Sidestepping repeatedly. This one was easier for Izuku because he could naturally last longer than most of the other students because of the endurance he built up from his own quirk and the training weights he wore all the time. The only student who could outlast him was the little kid with the purple balls on his head, who used them to bounce between them quickly. Eventually, the small kid had to stop because he would vomit from the amount of times he bounced between the cluster of purple balls. Which he did, and it was repulsive. It was impressive, though, that it caught Bakugo's attention. He glared at the boy, frustrated that he hadn't failed yet, but he didn't care because he knew Deku would fail. He had to, given that he was Deku. It was in his nature to fail. Trial 5. Throw a ball. A lot of people, with the exception of Bakugo, praised Ochako for effectively beating everyone else in the ball-throwing trial. But Izuku was worried when he saw the pleasant girl he met, Ochako, use her quirk to make the ball float off into the distance. Apparently, this was too much for the machine to calculate, so it gave her an infinity. However, this was merely a formality because the ball was still in the air, floating amidst the stars. An infinite number? Wow, that is incredible. Does she have an infinity? A boy uttered those words as Izuku looked down at his hands and clenched his fist, unable to look away from the girl who had saved him a month earlier. It was his turn to throw the ball, and he thought to himself, everyone else is showing amazing talent, while I still haven't made any significant impact. But at least I'm not coming last, so there's a positive. He said to himself as he got ready to toss the ball, now all that's left is the endurance run, the toe touching, and the upper body exercise. I just need to pass these next few tests and I should be in the clear. Just keep using 1%, that's all I can manage. Midoriya is doing rather well in this, though I must say I'm a little disappointed, especially after how he performed in the entrance exam, Iida said as Bakugo simply clicked his tongue in announcement. Tanya, Bakugo, and Ochako stood to the side as they watched the boy. So what? He will still fail, he said, he's fucking quirkless after all, to which Iida and Ochako turned in shock and bewilderment at the same time. Strange. What topic are you discussing? Izuku cannot possibly be without quirks, especially in light of what we witnessed during the exam. The boy immediately snapped his head at her, Ochako said. Rough face. What the fuck are you talking about? But just as the boy threw it, Aizawa's eyes flashed and the ball fell a harmless 57 meters, the boy said, as Aizawa narrowed his vision at the boy who was getting ready to throw the ball with everything he had, 1% one for all coursing through his arm. Izuku just looked at his hands and the ball, saying, what? Yet I'm positive that I erased your quirk. He whirled around to face the man, whose hair appeared to be waving upwards. He also tugged at the bindings around his neck, which swayed and moved around him, giving him an intimidating look, but the thing that scared him the most were the red eyes that glowed in his pupils and stared into his soul. Because what I'm seeing is just insulting and makes me question how someone like you got into UA, he said, glancing at the man. Deleted. It was then that he noticed the yellow goggles around his neck, as his mind quickly brought up his knowledge of heroes in his textbooks. I am aware of who you are. You have to be the superhero who has the ability to erase anyone's quirk when he looks at them. Eraserhead, the erasing hero. Name. Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa aka Quirk. Erase. He can use his gaze to negate the effects of any other quirk powers or abilities. However, he cannot negate a mutation class quirk, and the effect of the quirk wears off if he closes his eyes or if his target is in the way of his eyes. Eraserhead. I've never heard of him before? Tsuyu raised a finger, and Kirishima spoke. I have. He's one of those underground heroes that don't like to be in the spotlight, Tsuyu remarked as the group gathered and discussed the hero. Meanwhile, All Might, dressed in his yellow suit and hero form, leaned around the corner of the building and observed the action. Looking at the man, All Might thought, he avoids the media because he believes it hinders his work, and that not every hero should be strutting around in front of the camera. And on top of that, he and I don't exactly get along. I'm sorry Midoriya, I should have warned you before he did something like this. Aizawa approached All Might. You unleashed an amazing amount of power during the test that neither I nor the staff had ever seen before. He glared at Midoriya, who looked up in fear, and said, you'd think that a kid with that kind of power should be passing this test with ease, but so far you haven't shown anything near that level of power, which makes me assume that you have little or no control over your own power, correct? So much power that it could destroy the Zero-Foe villain with one punch. Bakugo widened his eyes at this. Izuku gave a small shake and then hung his head as he spoke. I'll take your lack of response as a no. Izuku hung his head and clamped his fist around his mouth. Basically, you got in with luck. And only then after you were saved by someone else, he said. At the moment, you're scared to push yourself past your comfort zone for fear that you won't be able to manage your power, which will make you exposed and in everyone's path. He glared at Ochako and Iida. You should just quit while you're ahead. Being a hero means going beyond your limits, plus ultra, if you will. If you can't do that, then you're basically holding everyone else back. Aizawa picked up the ball and tossed it to the boy who caught it, his hair falling back down as he turned away, and Izuku's heart practically fell into his stomach as he stared down at his hands, shaking. I'm giving you one last chance and returning your quirk. You're not low enough to fail right now, but if you can't surpass Bakugo's score without seriously hurting yourself, and demonstrate to me something of the caliber that you demonstrated in this test, then get out of here and stop wasting my time, he said, turning to face Izuku, who was staring down at his own hands. Looking at the boy and murmuring to himself, Bakugo only spat in disgust and said, I don't know what the hell that teacher was talking about, but he's going to fail. However, there's no way that worthless nerd could have taken out the 0-pointer. He turned his head and said, he was a failure in middle school and he'll be a failure now. Bakugo just made a tch noise and stared at Ochako, while she shook her head and said, I believe he can do it, as the boy turned to face her. Otherwise he wouldn't have been able to save me, Ochako said, praying silently for the boy to be allowed entry. He gripped the ball tightly in his hand as he started to worry. What do I do? What do I do? What can I do? I can't control anything past 1% and I can only activate endurance if I physically harm myself. But either one won't be able to alter my chances at passing this trial. He looked down at his hands as a plan started to form in his mind. He wants me to show something like I did in the exam, when one for all and endurance combined to save me. But I can't control that yet. There is no way I can tap into something like that and pass this trial. There is just no. But how can I do that? I haven't tried anything like that since the exam. Can my body even handle that? He said, clutching his fist, then looked up and said, no, I can't think of that. I need to pass this trial, or all I've done will have been for nothing, turning back as he looked at Aizawa. Sensei, he said, glancing at the man. I need to activate my quirk's secondary function in order to do this, and that requires something a little drastic. It won't incapacitate me, but it won't be pretty. Is that okay with you? The man squinted his eyes at the boy and asked. He wavered slightly at the intense look in Izuku's eyes for a moment, thinking, what is he up to? But he shrugged them off and nodded. Like I said, you can do anything so long as you don't leave the circle and you can still move, he told Izuku. The rest of the class stared dumbfounded as the green-haired teen started to shake and touch his hands. He let out a breath as he released the ball and let it fall to the ground. What is this? Before Aizawa or anyone else could respond, he pulled back his left arm and struck the ground with his fist, striking it hard once. He hissed in pain and quickly grasped his hand, his knuckles turning red, but it was nothing like what he did during the exam. Izuku drew back his left hand and resumed his assault, hitting the ground repeatedly, letting out gasps and groans of pain as he did so. Ignoring the horrified looks from those around him, he needed more. More pain. He needed to go beyond this. Midoriya. Izuku. As Uraraka and Iida watched him slam his fist into the floor, they said something. Sensei, you must put an end to him. Shaking his head, the man rejected Uraraka's pleas. He simply said, no, as she gave him a stunned look in return. He'll injure himself, though. His hair wavered and his eyes flashed at her as she was about to approach him and say. Uraraka tensed up and turned to face the boy, who was still punching his fist into the ground. This is his test. If he wants to injure himself, then it's his choice, the man commanded, adding, if you interfere, I'll expel you as well. Glaring at the boy, you can't stop him, it won't affect his chances, he declared. The sound of flesh hitting stone echoed throughout PE grounds, making the others recoil and cringe. Some, like the silent boy in the back and the child with the purple orbs, got a little queasy at the sight of the blood dripping down his fist, while others, like Ochako, Kirishima, and Iida, wanted to run up and stop him. The rest could only stare at the boy as he repeatedly pounded his fist into the ground. Bakugo turned to face him and put his hands in his pockets, thinking that he had finally snapped and was just letting out his frustration by staring at him. I knew it. He couldn't handle it, Bakugo thought to himself. Midoriya. I hope you know what you're doing. All Might asked the boy in a quiet voice as he kept punching the ground. All Might wanted to rush outside and stop the boy, but he held back because he knew that if he got involved, he might lose the boy's admission to UA High. Not enough. He slammed into the solid ground once more. I need more, it's still not enough. He hissed and punched once more. He just kept punching and punching the earth as more of his blood began to drip from his fist. His eyes focused intently as he punched again into the blood and dirt mixed soil. It got to the point where blood began to spew forth from breaks in his skin and paint the very surface crimson with its presence as more and more of the dirt were lost to his blows. A tiny splash of blood hit his cheek as his fist punched the ground, reminding him, remember what it was like? That rush of power. He ignored the others behind him, hearing them gasp and scream in shock. Remember what it was like, during the exam, back at the beach, he exclaimed. The earth cracked and splintered as he buried his fist into the ground, and a small gush of wind spread out from the impact, bringing everything to a silent halt. I need to pass. I need to get into UA, otherwise, he said, pulling his fist back one last time as he glared at the small crater covered in blood. Otherwise, I'm still going to be the same, useless Deku I've always been. And while everyone had assumed that nothing would happen and that the boy had damaged his fist for nothing, Bakugo simply rolled his eyes and waited for the moment he knew that Deku would start bawling his eyes out at any moment. For a while, nothing happened. Not a single whisper, not a single sound. With a sigh, Aizawa turned to face the boy and said, wasted. Still at 0. But then, as a tiny flicker of light moved across his fist, everything changed. For a brief moment, his hair flickered red as he looked, quickly grabbed the ball with his right hand, reared back his arm, and started to throw the ball. The red glow flickered before glowing brighter as it swirled and traveled up his arm and swarming across his entire body. Aizawa thought the boy was going to go full force and break his arm, but then he heard a tiny whisper from him. Not just yet. As his arm extended into its full arch, he spoke. A tiny gleam appeared in the man's eyes as All Might realized what he was going to do. Whoa kid, are you for real? With muffled excitement, he said. Not just yet. As the swing reached its full arch, he whispered once more. He channeled 100% of One for All through his arm as it surged and then gathered on the tip of his finger, saying, Aizawa-sensei is right. I am afraid. Afraid that can't control this power and afraid that I can't control 100% of One for All. But despite all that, I still need to work 10 times harder than anyone else, and at this moment. He exclaimed, right now, as the small vein of One for All gathered at his finger and the red energy of endurance surged around his fist. He briefly felt the merging of the two energies. I'll prove to him my abilities and surpass my boundaries, my plus ultra. At this moment, he yelled at the top of his lungs, channeling the combined energies into his finger and saying, wham! Aizawa looked down at his device and his eyes widened slightly as the ball left his finger and a large shockwave shot off, propelling the ball at high speeds and nearly blowing everyone off their feet. Everyone's jaws dropped and their eyes widened as the ball shot high into the air and then sailed back down and hit the ground, all the while computing its distance and velocity. 1.62 miles, he marveled as he glanced again at the number on the screen. Unbelievable, he didn't just pitch it at full strength. He channeled all his power into a single point, and managed to replicate the same effect as back in the exam while sparing his hand. It doesn't hurt as much this time, and I can still move my hands, Izuku thought to himself, his fingers still a little red from the throw, his left hand knuckles still bleeding onto the ground. He was breathing heavily as he watched how far the ball had gone into the air. Hey, sensei, Izuku said as the man looked up from the device and back to the boy as he gripped his wrist, while blood slowly leaked from his bleeding left knuckles. Is this good enough for you? As the man could only turn around and smile himself, he said, grinning. All Might was grinning even wider, even in his hero form, as he marveled at the boy in front of him. This kid, he marveled, feeling a little excitement for the first time in a long time as he was proud to be proven wrong. I came out here worried, but what the hell, Midoriya? You know you have to duplicate the effect of your adrenaline shot, even though you don't have complete control over it. Therefore, you charged up with your endurance power-up, combined it with 100% of One for All, waited until the very last second of your swing, and then unleashed it through one single point. You maximized your power, minimized your injury, and replicated the effect of your adrenaline shot. And all at the very last second, he exclaimed, beaming even more as he saw the courageous face of his successor through the slight discomfort. Midoriya, what the hell? When did you get so freaking cool? Then entire PE grounds was silent as once again, Izuku Midoriya managed to stun a collective group of students as he blasted the softball nearly 2 kms. They were also partially stunned because of the method he had taken to activate the power of endurance. It was hard not to be stunned when one of their future fellow classmates literally bleed himself to get a high score like that. Their reaction was understandable. Holy crap, one of them, the boy with the cylinder growths on his arms, said, as he looked at the score on the device. 1.62 kms. That's insane, he said as he got a nod from the pink-haired, skinned girl. I know. But it was so cool, and what the heck was with punching the ground thing? Was that part of activating his quirk? She asked while the girl with spiked ponytail merely looked concerned at his bleeding fist. Rather a crude way of activating it. His hand is rather banged up, she said as the boy with the red spiky hair seemed to grin. I think it was manly as hell, he said as he seemed to view his quirk activation as something only a true man would do. Meanwhile, over with Iida, Ochako and Yuga, their reaction was slightly more different than the others. At first, Ochako was concerned and afraid that the boy was going to hurt himself, as memories of his willing sacrifice still lingered in her mind as she now had concern for the boy hurting himself. But after seeing what he could do, she was honestly just amazed at him and felt happy seeing him easily beat that other boy's record. Way to go, Izuku. You finally got a hero score, she said as she decided she should cheer for him, hoping that it would somehow help him. His finger is swollen and his left hand is bleeding. It's just like back in the entrance exam. His quirk is very strange indeed, Iida said as he was trying to analyze the specific nature of Midoriya's quirk, as once again he had seen something that hardly seems to fit the boy's outer appearance. And yet once again, he was shown something incredible and beyond what he thought was possible. It wasn't very stylish, was all the blonde-haired boy, Yuga, simply said. But inside he too was rather impressed and slightly scared of the power he unleashed. Bakugo, on the other hand, was absolutely stunned. Simply and utterly stunned and shocked to his core, as he just stared with wide eyes and mouth hanging open. It was as if his mind could not comprehend what he had just seen with his own eyes, even though the evidence was right in front of him. Deku, the same scrawny little Deku he had grown up with as a kid, had just beaten his score by 915 meters. It's impossible. Impossible. Quirks can only manifest between the ages of 1 and 4. That was the rule. It was unthinkable that Deku had finally awakened his quirk after so long. But still, he managed to beat my score. His teeth began to grind and his fist clenched tight. How the hell could this happen? He then began to growl as his right hand flexed open as small sparks flickered in his palm. Oi, you bastard! What is the meaning of this? He growled out as his rage quickly consumed. Then before anyone else could stop him, he ran out as he quickly ran towards Deku, as he still held his sore hand. Deku! He yelled as Izuku turned to him as Bakugo came running towards him. What the hell is going on? Answer me, Deku, you bastard! He roared as Izuku instantly flinched as he instantly knew that he was going to hurt him. But before he could get any closer to him, the bands of cloth quickly shot towards him as Bakugo was instantly stopped and his quirk was shut off. What the hell? This cloth is hard, he managed to say as he struggled against the surprisingly strong pieces of cloth, as he followed them back to their owner. They're a special weapon that's made from carbon fiber, woven together with metal wire and a special alloy. They're designed to capture and contain unruly individuals that show dangerous personalities, Aizawa said as his quirk was active and his hair was flowing around him, a clear gross look on his face as he managed to stop the boy in time. Geez, you kids, stop making me use my quirk repeatedly, he scolded as everyone was afraid of what he would say next. I have dry eyes for crying out loud, he said as everyone was stunned. Such an amazing quirk wasted with such a weakness. He then let go of the cloths as his quirk deactivated, but kept his glare on the boy. Anyway, don't go charging at someone who beat your own score. You lost, it's a part of life, get over yourself, he said as he then turned around to Midoriya. And you, is your hand going to be okay? He said as Izuku flinched but nodded nonetheless. but was surprised when the man threw over a roll of bandages. "Go clean and bandage your hand by the tap over there, whoever's next step up," he said as he then turned to Uraraka. "You might want to help him, seeing as you were so concerned for him," he said as Ochako blushed slightly but nodded as he then gestured for everyone else to follow him. Midoriya being careful to walk around the clearly enraged teen as he went over to Uraraka as she led him over to the taps while blushing and muttering how close she was to him. Until a little while ago, he was just a pebble, an insignificant pebble on the path to my greatness. His fist gripped tightly as he looked at the stuttering form of the person he considered weak. He's just a fucking pebble. He raged as an intense hatred burned brighter in the boy, fueling his ever-growing disdain for Deku. Meanwhile, Izuku and Ochako were near the taps as she was helping to clean his hand, the blood trickling down his fingertips as the water mixed with the blood and washed down the drain. "Geez, you really didn't have to go that far," she scolded as she gently scrubbed the blood off his knuckles while the boy was blushing with his head down. Sorry, but I didn't really have much of a choice. Aizawa-sensei was threatening me with expulsion if I didn't do something, and I can't afford to be kicked out. Not before I'm even given a chance to prove myself," he said as she puffed her cheeks. "Still, you didn't have to go overboard like that," she said with a slightly annoyed look on her face, her cheeks puffed up and highlighting her permanent blush marks on her cheeks. Izuku chuckled nervously as he nodded. After washing the blood off, she began to wrap the bandages around his left hand. A small silence drifting between them as she applied the bandages, as her mind briefly wandered back to the exam a month ago, similar injuries appearing on the boy after he destroyed the zero-pointer. It made her wonder something she had been meaning to ask him. "Do you always have to hurt yourself?" she asked as he looked at her. "Pardon?" he asked, hoping for her to repeat her question. "Do always you need to hurt yourself to activate your quirk? Is it like something you have to do?" she asked again as he shook his head. "Sort of, it's just something I can do in case of an emergency. Any other time I can just enhance my strength. But if I'm in a pickle I can take additional damage and convert it into power. It's pretty handy actually," he said as she just continued to apply the bandages. "Does it hurt every time?" she asked as finished wrapping the bandages as he shrugged his shoulders. "A little, but the interesting thing about my quirk is that it allows me to build up a tolerance to the pain, so next time it won't hurt as much and I'll get physically stronger from it," he said as he held up his finger that wasn't as bad as it appeared. "See, it doesn't really hurt that much," he said as he flexed the finger. But from the look on her face, she seemed a little concerned about hearing that, but also confused as she looked back to him. "I guess, by the way, what did that boy mean you were quirkless? What was that about?" she asked as Izuku stiffened slightly and hung his head. "Well, see, my quirk kind of developed a little later than everyone else's. It was apparently a rare late mutation in my body, so for most of my life, I was considered quirkless by everyone that ever knew me. Like Kachan back there. And I hadn't told anyone aside from my mother, so he still thinks I'm the same quirkless kid he knew from middle school," he said as he gripped his now bandaged hand. "I've only had my quirk for 11 months now, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But it's clear that I still have a long way to go," he said as Ochako looked concerned. "So, when he called you Deku, was that an insult or something?" she asked. He nodded. "Why yeah, it's just something that he's called me ever since we were kids. It means, useless, and good for nothing, but it's okay. I'm used to it by now, it doesn't really bother me that much," he said as he smiled sadly as he had long since grown used to the insult, accepting it as a part of himself. Ochako, on the other hand, didn't like that as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Well, I don't think you're useless," she stated with a serious look on her face as he looked back up at her in shock. Useless person wouldn't have been able to save me from that faux villain a month ago, and you are far from being good for nothing. Otherwise you wouldn't have been able to beat that Bakugo kid's high score like that. I don't know what he sees about you, but from what I've seen, I think you're pretty amazing," she said as Izuku could only stare at her in muted awe. His mind trying to grasp what the girl was saying. He just couldn't understand what was happening. This girl didn't seem to see him the same as everyone he ever met. She didn't think of him as worthless, didn't see him as useless, and even seemed to care about his well-being. The only time he ever felt like that was with his mother, and even then, it wasn't anything like this. The encouragement and the praise for his own skill were too much for him, as he slowly felt the heat rush towards his cheeks and feared that his face would soon be glowing out of embarrassment. "And you know," she said as she smiled brightly, "I actually like the name Deku for you. It gives me this, never give up, kind of vibe, you know?" Something resonated inside him that day as he just stared at this girl, who had just taken the name that affiliated him with negativity and shame, and completely flipped it on his head. It was like when the Copernican revolution revealed that it was the Earth that revolved around the sun, and not the other way around. She just took that name and flipped it into something positive. Who was this girl, and why was she so kind to him? "Well, you're all patched up," she said as she stood up. "Come on, we have some trials to complete," she said as the boy just numbly stared at her as she ran back to the others, just as they were finishing the softball pitch. He then looked down at his bandaged hand as he could no longer feel the stinging pain that had slightly surged in his hand, as it was replaced with the memory of how soft and gentle her hands were. His face instantly flushed red, as he just realized he had talked to a girl properly this time and had held his own hand. "This is the best day of my life," he screamed in his own head as his face blushed red and small sparkles danced around his head. Meanwhile, All Might could only look in slight confusion and amusement as the boy stared off into space. He has the power to throw a ball over a kilometer away, yet he gets flustered over a girl holding his hand. "Huh. You really are an amazing one, aren't you, Midoriya?" He chuckled to himself as he watched the boy shake out of his stupor after being called out by Aizawa and ran back to the others. "But now, let's see if you managed to have any effect on Aizawa at all, or if he'll just be the same as last time," he thought as he continued to watch the others. The rest of the trials went rather well for Izuku after that. After the softball pitch, there was the endurance test, the upper body tests and the seated toe touch, where students were tested to see how long they could keep going before their bodies were forced to give out. To everyone's surprise, Izuku had got top marks on those tests. He could easily do multiple sit-ups without tiring out, could do pull-ups as much as he wanted. And when it came to the long-distance run, Izuku could keep going while everyone else was tired out. He theorized that this was probably another effect of his endurance quirk, seeing as it basically built up his body to endure more than most. He could only assume that it had a similar effect on his stamina, seeing as he had been wearing training weights for the last 11 months. His body was physically a lot stronger than most. Aside from Kirishima, who could literally harden his body into a perfect shield. The only thing he didn't excel at was the seated toe touch, but he was still rather flexible for an average human. During the entire time, however, Bakugo would constantly glare and snarl at the boy, as he seemed to outperform him in the endurance tests. He tried to beat him during the long-distance run and the sit-ups, but all that did was tire him out quickly and made him even angrier. Finally, the last of the physical trials were over as everyone gathered around the teacher. Izuku slightly nervous because the only outstanding mark he had gotten was the softball pitch and the endurance portion of the exam. But still, that didn't mean that he would be exempt from getting expelled. "The results are an aggregate sum of all your scores because if I did them individually we'd be here all day," Aizawa said as he held up the device. A holographic chart then appeared as it posted everyone from number 1 to number 20. Izuku nervously looked up as he searched for his own name, fear still clinging to his chest as he was afraid he got the lowest score. But to his surprise, he managed to get 11th place, just under Uraraka, as it showed that he managed to get higher due to his endurance test scores. His heart skyrocketed as he was not going to be the one kicked. But then guilt swelled in his chest as he noticed the name of the small boy, Mineta, was the dead last of the class. The smaller boy with the purple balls on his head was shaking as small tears gathered in his eyes, as he realized that he would be kicked out of UA, while Izuku would still get in. He looked down at his hand as he tried to convince himself that he shouldn't feel guilty about it, that he earned his place at UA. Even All Might himself told him this was because of his own efforts. But still, he clenched his fist as he looked at the small boy. "I feel like I'm cheating, using All Might's power like this," but before anything could happen the man shut off the chart. "By the way, I lied about the expulsion thing." A deadly silence fell over the group as Izuku, Ochako and Iida stared at the man who now had the biggest shit-eating grin on his face. "That was just a clever ploy to get you to perform at your best," he said as Izuku, Ochako and Iida screamed in shock. "Are you three serious? Of course, it was a ruse? There was no way a teacher would expel a student on the first day. the girl with the spiky ponytail said as everyone else was just as shocked as the three. None more so than the Mineta boy, as he seemed to have passed out from happiness. But sensei. That was highly deceptive and reckless. Midoriya injured himself trying to perform his best, Iida said as Ochako nodded furiously beside him as the man merely stared at them. And that was his choice. It just proved how far he is willing to go to become a hero, however reckless it may be, he said as Izuku stared at the praise, if you could call it that, and then looked down at his hand. That being said, he said as he handed the boy a slip of paper. You best head off to Recovery Girl and get your hands healed up. Can't have students going home injured after all, he said as Izuku nodded. But was internally afraid because he knew that Recovery Girl was going to be cross with him for going overboard again. He could already see the scowl on her face the minute he walks in. But other than that, he was just happy, knowing that he got in and that he was placed at the 11th place on the chart. 11th place, it's a small start, but a good step nonetheless. He gripped his hand as he looked back up as he and the others began to head back to the class. Just glad that the whole expulsion thing was a lie. Nice joke, Aizawa, but April Fool's was last week. Aizawa stopped as he noticed All Might. You've been here the whole time? He asked as All Might just grinned at the man. Don't change the subject. I saw your record. Last year alone you expelled an entire class of first years because you believed they didn't have any potential whatsoever, he said as an all-knowing grin came onto his face. Just admit it, you saw it too, right? Midoriya's raw potential, he said as Aizawa raised an eyebrow at him. You too, you seem to be very interested in the boy, aren't you? That's not the proper mindset of a proper teacher after all, he said with a smirk as All Might flinched at this. Aside from that, I'll admit his chances are just above the 0% mark, maybe 2% more than most. That's it. Besides, I can kick out anyone I want whose chances are below 0. It's not a cruel thing to stop the half-assed from chasing their dreams, he said as All Might just stared at him. So that's your brand of kindness? Just as I thought, you and I are never going to get along. End of the first day. School's out. Izuku sighed a breath of relief as he walked out of the UA High. He was tired because Recovery Girl had just spent the last hour scolding him for being reckless with his quirk and making her heal him again. She then proceeded to jot down and document what he told her about combing his two quirks together. He noted that when he used Endurance and One for All at the same time, his throw felt more powerful than he had ever felt before. It seemed that Endurance's amplifying abilities doubled the output of whatever percentage he was using of One for All. Which meant when he poured 100% into his finger, it was actually going at 200%. Which then caused his mind to start thinking of new ways to use his quirk, something he would research more when he got him. But right now, I'm beat, he said as he walked to the front gate. I really got stop making her angry. I fear one of these days she's going to seal me in a full body cast just to stop me from injuring myself, he said to himself as an image of him being trapped in a body cast floated in his mind, along with an angry glare from Recovery Girl. Midoriya. A voice proclaimed behind him as he jumped at the sudden voice and hand on his shoulder. Luckily it was only Iida and not Bakugo like he feared. How are your hand and finger, are they all right? He asked as Izuku blinked but nodded. Why yeah, Recovery Girl healed me all up and my quirk pretty much helped strengthen them for the next time, he said as Iida nodded. I see, your quirk is a rather strange one if I must say so myself. Still, I was rather surprised by how Aizawa-sensei tricked us into making us perform at our very best. But even I can see how encouraging through deception can be a good thing, I think. He pondered as he thought about how the teacher lied to his students to push themselves. As this was happening, Izuku could only stare at the boy as it was clear he was nothing like he thought he was. He wasn't scary or mean, he was just a very honest and diligent person who took things very seriously. Maybe a little too seriously. But it was honestly something that he found inspiring, to see how devoted he was to become a hero. Hey, you too. A voice called out as they turned to see Uraraka running towards them. You're going to the train station, right? Wait for me, she asked as they nodded. You're that Infinity Girl, right? Iida asked while Izuku raised an eyebrow at the nickname. Infinity Girl. Oh, right, her Infinity score, he thought as she nodded as she smiled. Yep. I'm Ochako Uraraka and you're Tenya Iida, right? She asked as he nodded. So, you're going on the same train as Deku, right? She asked as he nodded but then blinked. Deku? You mean Midoriya? I thought his name was Izuku? He asked as she nodded. It is, but apparently, that explosion kid likes to call him Deku as an insult, she said as Iida was shocked at this. An insult? Then why are you using the same name he uses? He asked, waving his arms around and honestly surprised and confused at this as she just shrugged her shoulders. Well, I honestly think it's a good name for him and I want to change it around for him, make it into something positive. No. Plus, I think it's kind of cute, don't you think? She said with a smile as the teen just looked confused as he turned back to Izuku. Midoriya, are you really alright with this? He asked but was stunned as he saw the boy was blushing bright red with his eyes open wide and hands stretched out. Nice to meet you, I'm Deku, he said as the boy was just stunned. Iida was honestly confused, but seeing as the boy seemed to have no trouble with the name, he decided to drop it. After that, the three began to walk to the train station as they discussed what they found to be interesting about the whole day. Even talking about how some of their quirks worked. But during the entire time they walked to the train station, Izuku couldn't help but feel happy walking with these people, as they were some of the first people who wanted to talk with him. It was a completely different experience from the one he had back in the middle school. His mind briefly flashed back to his old school as their jeers and taunts still echoed in his ears. A small feeling of inadequacy and loneliness briefly shrouded the boy, before he turned to see the smiling face of Ochako and Iida as they walked with him. Somehow feeling that coming to this school and gaining his own quirk was the best thing to ever happen to him and how ecstatic he was that he could enjoy this small moment in his life. But while he was smiling, Toshinori was looking down on the three as he held a red costume in his hand with a white circle in the center. Sorry my boy, but we haven't got time to relax, he said as he held the costume. Tomorrow will be your true test, and I just pray that you're ready for it, he said as he watched the boy blissfully unaware of what would happen to him. The next day was rather tame for Class 1A as they began to realize that UA High was just like any other high school. They had lectures and classes, some of which involved learning English with present mic, and then they would have lunch in the main cafeteria. The plus side for Izuku was meeting all sorts of well-known heroes in person. Such as the cooking hero, Lunch Rush, who offered up his specialty white rice. It was pretty much rather simple and plain after that. But the class that everyone was looking forward to was the daily foundational heroic studies, that was to be taught by none other than All Might himself. It was hard not to get excited about that. A class being taught by the #1 hero in all of Japan, teaching them in their classroom. And while Izuku had already been trained and knew All Might, it was still exciting to be taught by him in the same school. He just hoped that he didn't do anything to reveal his secret of One for All or the connection they had in front of everyone else. I am here. Everyone turned to the front as they heard those words, coming through the door like a normal person. Everyone stared in awe as the #1 hero All Might stood at the entrance of the door, his cape flowing in the wind as he looked like a stereotypical hero. That was anything but normal, but it was so cool. The entire class thought as they started compliment and saying how cool All Might looked in his Silver Age costume. Some like Kirishima saying how manly it looks, while Yuga complimented its style. But Izuku noticed that the man was slightly shaking as he posed. It was subtle, but after spending 10 months with the man, he could tell when he was forcing his hero form. No doubt he was using up his hero form time in front of the others to keep up his appearance as the symbol of peace. Something that inspired Izuku to try his best in the class today. Welcome future heroes to the foundations of heroics. Here I teach the basics of hero training, by teaching you the different ways you can become a hero, by pitting you in many different trials, for which you shall get tons of credit for, the man said as he flexed his large muscles, while everyone in the class just looked excited. Which is why today we shall be starting with combat training, he proclaimed as he held up a small card that had the bold letters of battle written on it. As soon as he heard this, Bakugo began to grin as he could already feel the rush of using his quirk in combat. It was what he wanted to do since he got here. To use his quirk without getting into trouble, and give him the perfect excuse to find out how strong Deku's quirk was, and why he had dared hide it from him. While Izuku, on the other hand, became nervous, as he could already feel Bakugo's glee at the prospect of fighting him. Which made him a little nervous, because of what happened yesterday. And to go with that are these. Your brand new hero costumes. He pointed to the wall as the wall slid open and multiple cases lined the insides, all of them having numbers from 1 to 20. These costumes are designed based on your quirks and the specifications that you made before UA started. After you get change, head down to Battleground Gamma, and then your test shall begin. He proclaimed. Everyone got immediately excited for this as they all rushed to the briefcases with their numbers on them. Izuku himself could barely hold back his excitement as he had been waiting months to wear his costume. Shortly everyone was gathered at the battleground dressed in their hero costumes as Izuku came out dressed in his hero costume. His mind flashed back to 3 weeks ago, as he was worried about what he would need for his costume, only to remember that he was still registered as Quirkless, reason being he had spent the last 10 months prior training and mastering One for All that he forgot to register. Luckily All Might had assured him and told him it was easy to register his quirk. But that had still left him with the problem of his costume. That quickly changed when his mother came in holding up a handmade jumpsuit that was apparently based off a design he had in his notebook. He was honestly surprised, asking why she made it, but then found out it was her way of apologizing to him. A way to make up the fact that until only recently she started to encourage him to be a hero when she knew she should have said the words he needed to hear so many years ago. He never held it against her. He understood that there really wasn't much she could do at the time, even though he wished she had said the words he needed. But that didn't matter anymore because she was supporting him now, and that was all that mattered. Which is why I'm going to wear this costume with pride. And become wearing this, he thought as he barely stepped out into the light, ready to face the challenge ahead. Ah, Deku, cool costume. It looks very practical. He heard Uraraka's voice as he turned to greet her, only to blush when he saw her in her skin-tight costume that hugged her curves. I wish I was more specific with my costume. It ended up being a skin-tight bodysuit, she said as Izuku could only blush at her. Hero course is the best, the small boy said as Izuku spun around in both shock and slight. However, at that moment, All Might began to notice some things about the boy's costume. The long ears on his head, the painted-on smile on the face mask were all features like his own. It was apparent to him how much he inspired the boy, how he would go so far as to have those features implemented on his costume, and he couldn't help but chuckle at his fanboy successor. So obvious, right? Now it's time for the combat training. You all will be split into teams of 2 and will be battling each other in an indoor training exercise. A 2-on-2 battle, where the goal will be for the villain team to guard a nuclear device, and keep it away from the hero team. And before any of you ask, yes, it is an essential part of the heroics foundations. Heroes must learn how to fight against villains and stop their nefarious plans. For many of them hide in the shadows. He explained as the others began to bombard him with many different questions, and one random one about their costume. I'll get to all of you one at a time. In any case, the teams will be decided by a draw from this box, he said as he held up a box with the word lottery on it. When you draw out a name, that is who you will be partnered with, he exclaimed as Iida held up a hand. Is that really how we'll do it? He asked before Izuku spoke up. Makes sense actually. Heroes often have to randomly team up with other heroes they hardly know very well, so the test might be focused on that, he said as Iida realized that as well. I see, I apologize for my remark. Now then, let's team up. All Might exclaimed as each one of them drew a name out of the box. By some miracle of chance, Izuku managed to pick Ochako's name as she seemed really excited to work with him, while he just blushed and thought about how lucky he was. Following them was a kid with ice covering his left side being partnered with the tall multi-limbed teen. The Bakugo and Tenya, who was clearly shocked to find out they would be teamed up together. It went on like that until everyone was assigned a partner. Now then, the first team that will be pitted together will be, All Might said as he placed his hands in 2 boxes and pulled out 2 balls. Team A as the heroes, and Team D as the villains. The moment he heard that, Izuku's heart dropped into his stomach as he instantly turned to Bakugo as the boy too was just as stunned as him. But then turned and glared at him as he knew he was still pissed about the trials yesterday, especially after finding out he had gotten a quirk after so many years. He knew that at some point he would be up against his old classmate in a test like this, the moment he heard the words battle trial. He had just hoped that it would be months later after he managed to gain a better control over his quirk. But it seemed that fate had other ideas and decided to pit him against Bakugo earlier than expected, and he just hoped that he wouldn't end up in a body bag. 5 minutes later, top floor. After being explained the rules and told they could go all out but would be stopped if it became too dangerous, Team D headed inside to prepare, while Team A had to wait outside and memorize the layout of the building they were given. Both boys looked at each other one last time, as Bakugo just clicked his cheek in annoyance and went into the building. When they got to the top floor, Ida began to look around at the large papier-mâché nuclear device that they were charged with defending. It aches my heart having to become a villain. But this is to better ourselves, to become heroes, so I shall not waste this opportunity, Ida exclaimed with conviction as he prepared himself for the battle. Which reminds me, since we have time, I was wondering if we should go over what we know about our enemy. You seem to know a lot about Midoriya, though you are surprised by the fact that he has a quirk? Even calling him quirkless? Care to explain? He questions, hoping to get an insight of the boy's potential. But Bakugo was completely somewhere else as his mind was shifting back to the trails and the unusual display of power from a previously quirkless Deku. It still didn't make sense to him. How could Deku have finally gotten a quirk, and why now after so long? Or did he have one all along and just not tell him? A strange thought came to him as his mind then flashed back to the softball pitch as he remembered the strange red energy surged after hitting his foot into the ground. The energy appeared after he got hurt. His mind then going back to all the times he beat on Deku as he gripped his fists tight. Has he been using me to get stronger? That thought seemed to enrage him even more as the mere thought of the nerd deceiving him for so long made his blood boil. A vicious snarl came over his face as small explosions lined his palm. He then grinned darkly as he turned to the teen. He shouldn't have a quirk, he's fucking Deku, a useless nerd. But yeah, it seems he does have a quirk, one that I can't wait to fight. Tenya didn't like that look in his eyes as he could tell the boy was serious in his claims about fighting Midoriya. He just hoped that he didn't do anything too rash that could cost them this trial. If he knew Bakugo like Izuku did, he would have been more worried. 5 minutes later, outside the villain's lair. Outside, Izuku and Ochako were memorizing their pieces of paper as the time was slowly reaching the end of the preparation, which meant they had exactly 5 minutes to find the device, defeat or evade the villains and grab the device. Izuku looking up at the top of the building as he read over the blueprints. So, I guess we should commit these plans to memory, just like in a real situation, huh? Ochako asked as she looked over the blueprints. And we have to find the device inside this whole building. That makes me a little nervous. Who knows how long it will take to find them? Deku, you know something about that Bakugo kid. What do you think they'll do this? She wondered, then flinched as the boy placed a hand to his chin and began to mutter to himself. If I know Kacchan, he will want the device at the top of the building, above everyone else. Which makes sense, it's more defendable up there and it would bite into our time to get there. So, we would only have roughly a few minutes at most to get to the device. But, knowing Kacchan, he may just come at me with a full frontal assault and try to take me out. It would be difficult if it's me and Uraraka against Kacchan and Iida. But I don't think Iida would do anything rash. He doesn't seem like the type of person to rush in without a plan, so that may work in our favor. But if they do team up, we'll be in serious trouble, and I only have limited training with my quirk, so I don't know if. Holy crap, you're muttering like crazy. And you're sweating through your costume. That outburst was enough to shake Izuku out of his muttering as he turned to her. Sorry. I'm just a little nervous, he said as he looked up at the building. We're going up against someone I knew from middle school, and he and I don't exactly get along very well. So, I feel like I need to be on my guard in there, he said as Ochako looked sadly at him. I see, he made fun of you a lot, right? Even making up that useless Deku name? He nodded as he then looked up at the building. Yeah, but the thing is, despite all that, I think he's an amazing person, he said as Ochako looked confused. I'm not going to kid myself. I know he's a complete jerk and a really mean person. But I can't help but admire him for his skills. His quirk, his overwhelming drive to be the best. They're so much better than mine will ever be, he said with a sad tone while Uraraka could only stare at the boy. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let him win this. I've worked too hard and went through too much just to lose here. I have to beat him. I can't lose here. The way he spoke sparked something in Uraraka as she smiled at the boy, glad to see that he would persevere and do his best at this. So, it's a fated battle between men, right? That instantly caused him to blush as he waved his arms around. Ah, sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into this. He stuttered and mumbled while she could only chuckle at his expense. While in the control room, the rest of the students and All Might watched from the monitors as All Might began to judge their performances. For this part, my boy, I have to become impartial and judge you just I would everyone else. But be careful, Midoriya. Even practice tests like these can be dangerous, especially when one is given the freedom to go all out, he thought to himself as he watched the monitors. Then it came time for them to enter, as they managed to sneak in through a window. They each had a small earpiece in their ears to communicate with themselves, and hear instruction from All Might to let them know when they were going too far or if the time had run out. Midoriya's heart was hammering in his chest as he and Uraraka peeked behind each corner as they carefully searched the building. Izuku more out of the knowledge that eventually Kacchan would come running up and attacking him, while also worrying about how he was going to fight him. So far, I only have 1% control over One for All. If I combine it with Endurance's amplifying effect, I can increase the output to 2%. But, I'm still outmatched by his natural skill and his knowledge on his own quirk. Not to mention if I go all out like I did during the exam, I could end up killing him. His mind flashed back to the destroyed zero-pointer and shuddered to think what would happen if he used that on a living person. Calm down, I just need to remember all the notes I made on indoor battles, just need to remember. His train of thought was cut off as he felt the familiar sensation of heat and light as Bakugo came jumping from around the corner. His palms already superheated as he thrust his hand towards them. An ambush! Mineta yelled in the control room as Bakugo threw his hand at the boy. Get down! Izuku managed to yell as he tackled Uraraka out of the way, as a large explosion rocked the hallway. The smell of burnt cloth and hair instantly alerted Izuku as part of his mask was destroyed, as he was forced to rip off the burning fabric, to which he luckily avoided having his head set on fire. Damn! That was close. Uraraka, are you alright? He asked as his first instinct was to check on Ochako, to which she nodded. I'm fine, but Deku, your face, she said as he shook his head, letting her know that he was fine and that it was only just a scratch. Deku, a loud growl reverberated in the hall, as Izuku and Ochako flinched at the tone as the blonde teen slowly turned his head and glared at the boy. Don't you dare fucking dodge me, you shit, he growled as the smoke and glare made him look like a villain. I knew it, I'm his main target, what the hell? A sneak attack? That wasn't very manly. A boy with spiky red hair said as he and the others watched from the control room. Ambushes are still considered a strategy, they're playing the villains after all, and villains often attack the heroes when they least expect it. This is a simulation battle after all, All Might said as he narrowed his eyes at the screen. Still, I wonder how you will get through this one, Midoriya? Deku, you've been using me, haven't you? Bakugo growled as he slowly walked towards him. Is that how you got in, with that quirk of yours? How long have you been hiding your quirk from me, Deku? How long have you been tricking me into making you stronger? Answer me, Deku. He yelled as he ran at the boy, fully intent on blowing him to pieces. Izuku instantly reacted as he shocked the boy by grabbing his arm, and with little time to even register what the boy had done to him, Izuku managed pulled him over his shoulder and slammed him into the floor. The explosive boy letting out a gasp of air as his back slammed into the floor. Everyone from the hallway to the control room was shocked as the green-haired boy glared at the blonde teen who slowly got up. Kacchan, I haven't been using you, I swear I haven't, but I know you're not going to believe me, no matter what I tell you, just like I know that every time you attack, you start with your right arm first, Izuku said as the boy looked back and glared at him. I know everything about you because I write notes on every hero think is amazing, like the one you blew up and threw away, which included notes on you, Kacchan, because you are one of the people I look up to. He yelled at the teen who just stared back with a mixture of shock and rage. His mind flashing back to nearly a year ago when he destroyed Deku's notebook and threw it out the window as he growled in rage. All my life you've called me weak and useless because I didn't have a quirk like everyone else. But the thing is, Kacchan, I'm not like I was a year ago. I'm not the same Deku you affiliated with being useless. Midoriya said as he held up his fists and a bright flame burned in his eyes. From now on, my Deku isn't going to mean useless. It's going to mean I never give up. He yelled as both Bakugo and Ochako stared in awe at the boy, while those in the control room wished they could hear what they were saying. But All Might, just smiled at the boy as he felt a hint of pride at the boy's determination and drive. "All right, my boy, show them what you've got," he said as Izuku stood before the boy who had harassed him for so long, while said boy just glared with a furious anger. The battle between fated men was about to begin. Omake. Izuku's endurance test for the final challenge. The students were given a series of endurance tests to see how much their own physical bodies could handle, as it was important to measure their own human limits as well as their quirks. Starting off with sit-ups. However, Izuku's mind was elsewhere as he continued to do sit-ups, blissfully unaware of what was happening around him. "Okay, I have to admit I didn't expect my softball pitch to be that powerful. Midoriya. I know that endurance doubles my strength, but I had never considered what it would do to one for all," he thought as he continued the sit-ups. Midoriya. "If that's the case, would that mean that I can use more of one for all, even at its lowest?" Midoriya. He snapped out of it as he looked up to see Aizawa and the other students staring at him. "You can stop now, it's Uraraka's turn," he said as noticed that everyone had been staring at him as his sit-ups had gone beyond anyone else's. He blushed at this as he swapped places with her. Next was the pull-ups. "So what if I apply endurance to one for all in my legs? Could I run 2 times faster than 1%, or would my body be unable to handle it? I need to test this as soon as I can. This could help me later on in the long run," he thought to himself as he was unaware of everyone else staring at him as he continued to mindlessly pull himself up and down while everyone else had stopped. Bakugo growled as he watched the boy continue his exercise without even a bead of sweat on him. "Who the hell does he think he is? I'll show that little punk," he growled to himself as he tried to match Izuku's set. But after 10 minutes, he became too tired and had to stop. All the while glaring at the boy who was still lost in his train of thoughts, unaware of what was happening. "Oi! Stop that, you damn nerd!" he yelled as he managed to break the boy out of his trance and realized that he had done it again. The final test was the endurance run, as Izuku was once again lost in his own train of thoughts as he ran around the track. "Still, I should be careful. If this is anything like adrenaline shot, then there could be side effects that I'm not aware of. Like, maybe my body will start breaking down when I get older, or my ligaments will deteriorate, or even cutting my lifespan in half because of it. I need to talk to Recovery Girl and see what she reckons." Aizawa and the others just stared at the boy who continued to run around the tracks, his train of thought distracting him as he didn't even realize that everyone else had long since stopped and he was still going. "What the hell is this kid? Is he some kind of a monster?" the boy with the cylinders on his arms asked, as he and the others just stared at him. "I've never seen stamina such as this, truly I have underestimated him," Iida said as he waved his arms about. "I think it's pretty cool. Look how long he can go, it's awesome," Ochako said as the pink-haired girl just grinned. "Makes you wonder how good his stamina is elsewhere," she said as some of them looked confused. "What do you mean?" a girl with headphone jacks grown off her earlobes asked, as the pink girl smirked. "I mean, if he can keep going like this in a test, how long do you think he would last in the bedroom?" she asked with eyebrows wiggling, as all the girls pondered that and then blushed rapidly. Uraraka blushing madly as a strange image popped into her head as her cheeks flushed red. Where did that come from?" she shrieked internally as Mineta instantly fell to his knees. "Midoriya. You son of a bitch. You're already becoming popular with the girls," he said with blood dripping off his bitten lip, as the other boys just stared weirdly at the purple-headed boy. Finally, Aizawa had enough as he wrapped his cloth around the boy. "Oi, knock it off. If you keep going we'll be here all day," he said with a slightly cross monotone voice as Izuku flinched and bowed. Sorry," he said as All Might could only watch the behind a building as he smirked. "Ha ha ha. You never cease to amaze me, Midoriya my boy," he thought with pride as he watched the boy. But internally was also a little jealous of the boy, wishing he could do half the things Izuku could do now. And instantly wished he could be like he was back in his old days. Shit, I'm getting too old.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.